The city never sleeps at this altitude. Seoul stretched 42 floors below the penthouse windows like a living, breathing thing. 10 million lights pulsing in the dark, indifferent to everything happening above them. It was 4 minutes past midnight, and the kitchen held the particular silence that only exists in spaces where very wealthy people live very empty lives. Imani stood at the marble island with both hands pressed flat against the cold stone. She was still in her uniform. She had not moved in 4 minutes. She knew, because she had been counting. Counting was what she did when everything inside her needed to stay controlled. When the walls needed to hold, and the mission needed to stay primary, and the thing she refused to name needed to stay nameless. She heard him before she saw him. Or rather, she felt him. The atmospheric shift that Kang Tae-yang produced simply by existing in a space, like barometric pressure dropping before a storm. Power did that. But tonight, something else followed him into the room. Something rawer. Something that had nothing to do with boardrooms or billion-dollar decisions, or the empire he had spent 15 years constructing, floor by careful floor. He stopped in the doorway. She knew without turning. The silence between them was not empty. It had been building for 4 months, accumulating in stolen seconds and careful distances and words that stopped just short of what they actually meant. Now it had weight, texture, heat that had no business existing in a kitchen made of marble and glass and cold perfection. Neither of them spoke. Then he said 2 words that Imani would spend a very long time thinking about. Just one night, not the boardroom voice, not the voice she had watched make rooms full of powerful people go very still very quickly. Something stripped of all that, something underneath all of it. Asking, not commanding, not assuming. Asking the way people ask when they have run out of every other option, and asking is the only honest thing left. Imani's hands pressed harder against the marble. She started to say his name, his formal name, the name that kept the appropriate distance between them. He stopped her before she finished. He said his own name the way he had been saying it for weeks, quietly, almost gently. The name he asked her to use when there was no one else in the room. And that name, said in that way, at this hour, had been a problem for her every single time. She started to tell him that this was not appropriate,
This isn't real.
that there were rules,
Tell me
that there
this
were
isn't
walls
happening.
between people in their respective positions, and those walls existed for reasons, and she understood every one of those reasons, and she had built her own version of them very carefully and deliberately over 4 months. He told her he knew all of that. He said he had known since the beginning. He said he was standing in her kitchen at midnight anyway. She asked him why tonight, why this specific night, out of all the nights that had passed between them in this cold and glass and marble space. He told her. He told her that earlier that day he had sat in a boardroom and watched his wife use everything he had spent 15 years building as a weapon against him. In front of every person whose respect he had earned through 15 years of discipline and sacrifice and choices that had cost him things he had never fully accounted. He told her that when it was over, when the room emptied and the damage was done, and the day reached its end, the only thing he had wanted was to walk past the kitchen and see her light still on. Something moved through Imani's chest. Something she had been refusing to name for weeks. Something that had started small. A coffee cup set beside her without ceremony. A conversation in a library that lasted longer than it should have. A rainy balcony and 1 inch of space on a railing. and had grown into something she no longer had the energy to pretend was not there. She turned around, and that was the mistake. Or the beginning, depending on how she would come to understand it later, because the man standing in her kitchen was not the one she had studied in case files and financial records and surveillance photographs. There was no armor, no performance. His tie was undone, his jacket gone, and in his eyes was something that looked like a man standing at the very edge of himself and asking, without commanding, without assuming, not to be alone there. She reminded him of everything that stood between them. His wife, his company, his world, which had very specific rules about situations like this and people like her. He told her he knew every one of those rules. He told her he was standing there anyway. His hand rose slowly. It hovered near her face, not touching, not yet, not without her answer. A question made physical, every inch of it waiting. He told her to say the word. He told her he would walk out, and they would never speak of it again. The city pulsed 42 floors below them, enormous, indifferent to everything they were and everything they were about to become. Imani thought about her mother. She thought about the prison phone calls. Every Sunday, collect. Her mother's voice kept steady and warm through glass and wire and 14 months of injustice. She thought about the case files covering every surface of her rented room in Mapo. She thought about the mission, the reason she had come here, the wall she had built around everything soft inside herself, brick by careful brick, since the day she had learned what had been done to Dorothy Cole. She had 22 reasons to say go. She could not say go. She whispered that she could not. And something broke open in his expression. Relief and fear arriving at exactly the same moment, like two trains meeting on the same track. He leaned his forehead against hers, barely touching. The most careful thing she had ever felt from another person. He said this was going to change everything. She agreed. She said everything was already broken. He said he would rather break it with someone real. The city below them carried on without comment. And Imani Cole, the woman who had come to Seoul to dismantle Kang Tae-yang's empire from the inside, felt the mission fracture right down the center of herself. Clean and quiet and completely irreversible. Dear friends, I want you to take a pause with me, just before I tell you what happened next, and I promise you, nothing will prepare you for it. I need to ask you something first. If you were Imani, if you had come this far, built this wall, carried this mission, could you have sent him away? Drop your answer in the comments right now. And if you are not subscribed to this channel yet, do it this second, because this story is just getting started and you cannot miss what comes next. Now, let us go back. Because this moment did not begin at midnight. It began 4 months ago in Chicago, with a phone call that ended one life and started another. 8 hours before midnight.
Thank you for the
boardroom
Chairman.
on the 38th floor of TY Holdings Tower had been designed to project one thing above everything else. Inevitability, the glass, the clean lines, the chair at the head of the table positioned so that whoever occupied it appeared to be the natural conclusion of every conversation in the room. On that particular afternoon, it was a trap. And Kang Tae-yang did not know it yet.
Thank you for the overview, Chairman.
He had presented the
However,
company's
my figures
5-year
suggest a
restructuring
path
plan
forward.
with the
One
kind of precision that comes from knowing material, the way some people know their own heartbeat. Every projection, every number, every risk and contingency and pathway forward. 15 years of building, distilled into a vision for what came next. His vision, 3 years of quiet architecture brought to this room, this table, these 14 faces. Seo Hirin entered at 10:17 in the morning. She was technically there as an observer. She was his wife. She sat at the far end of the table and opened a leather portfolio and began speaking in the way that knives begin working. Not loudly, not dramatically, but with a precision that does not announce itself until the damage is already complete. She presented a counter-analysis using his own data, rearranged. His own numbers, recontextualized. A version of his company in which the man who built it was the liability. She mentioned an independent risk assessment that the board had reviewed. An assessment that she had commissioned, that he had not known existed, that had been circulating among board members for weeks before he walked into that room. He watched his board drift, one face at a time. The movement was almost imperceptible. 12 years of reading rooms told him what was happening before the evidence was complete. Allies finding the table more interesting than his eyes. Shoulders shifting, almost nothing, toward the woman at the far end of the room, who was dismantling his plan with his own materials. Then he looked at Oh Jae-min, his best friend of 15 years. The man who had stood beside him when the company was 3 people in a rented office, and the future was a word they had to take entirely on faith. Jaemin looked at the table. That single gesture, from that specific person, told Tae-yang everything. Not just about today. About how long this had been happening. About how deep the roots of it went. He did not break. He did not raise his voice. He did not show a single crack to a single person in that room, because he had not built what he had built by showing his wounds to the people who made them. He adjourned the meeting. Controlled. Final. In the elevator alone, the doors sealed around him, and he allowed himself 30 seconds. Pressed both hands against the mirrored wall. Let the weight of it move through him like a current. Felt it fully. Then he put it back in the box, and he straightened his jacket, and rode the rest of the way up in silence. That evening, he went to his wife's suite. He stood in the doorway and attempted to open a conversation about what had happened. She told him there was nothing to discuss before he had finished speaking. She told him the board had concerns and she was representing them. He reminded her that she was his wife. She reminded him that she was also a shareholder and told him not to confuse the two. She turned back to her vanity. He stood in the doorway of his own marriage, a visitor in a room that had never fully been his, and felt the particular exhaustion of a man who has run out of the right words and is no longer certain the right words exist. From the hallway, Imani watched his reflection in the dark window glass at the corridor's end. For one unguarded second, she saw what 15 years of building and losing yourself inside it looks like on a person's face. She looked away. The image stayed with her for the rest of the night. 4 months earlier, in Chicago, at exactly 6:22 in the morning. Imani's apartment was the kind of organized that looks chaotic to anyone who did not know what they were looking at. Dorothy Cole's case files covered the dining table in a system that only Imani could navigate. Financial statements cross-referenced with transfer records, employment history mapped against the subsidiary's audit calendar, a timeline on the wall marked in 3 colors that meant 3 different things. Her mother's photograph was on the wall above all of it. Dorothy at 50, laughing at something off camera, wearing the blue blazer she had bought herself the day she made senior accountant. 12 years of service. Perfect performance reviews. The kind of employee that companies feature in their recruitment materials. 14 months ago, Dorothy Cole had been arrested. Charged with embezzling $3.8 million from TY Holdings' American subsidiary accounts. The evidence was airtight. Except Imani had spent 6 years in the Secret Service Financial Crimes Division, and she knew what manufactured evidence looked like because she had spent 6 years building the real version. The difference lived in her chest before she could articulate it in a report. Her phone rang. Agent Reyes, her former supervisor, FBI Financial Crimes. He told her the trail in her mother's case led to Seoul, to TY Holdings directly, not just the subsidiary. He told her officially that she needed to wait, that international cooperation took months and the people involved knew that and were counting on it. Then his voice dropped, and he told her unofficially that the domestic staff position at Kang Tae-yang's Seoul penthouse had been posted the previous day through a luxury staffing agency. He mentioned, while he was noting things, that her Korean was better than anyone he had worked with in 20 years. He told her he had not called. He told her to close the window before she left. And then the line went dead. Imani sat for a long moment. She looked at her mother's photograph. She thought about Dorothy reading Korean novels aloud on Sunday mornings, because beautiful things do not belong to one language. She thought about her mother saying, "The truth has a sound. Learn to listen for it." She thought about 14 months of collect calls. Her mother's voice kept warm and steady through federal correctional glass so that her daughter would not hear her afraid. Imani stood up, closed the case files, opened her laptop, and began building a cover identity with the precision of someone who had done this before and understood that details are not negotiable. They are the difference between the mission succeeding and everything falling apart before it begins. The cover name was Imani Carter, close enough to her real self that she would not slip under pressure, far enough from Cole that it would not surface in casual background checks. The work history was fabricated with Secret Service exactness, 3 verifiable references, Seoul 2 employment records with supporting documentation that would hold under anything short of a federal audit. Her Korean was fluent. She had been studying since her mother first mentioned the company name 7 years ago, because Dorothy had said learning their language meant taking them seriously. She packed one bag. The only personal item was her mother's photograph, tucked inside the front cover of a Korean literature novel Dorothy had given her for her 28th birthday. At Incheon Airport, the cold Seoul air arrived all at once. The scale of the city pressing in from every direction, 10 million lives going about their business with total indifference to the woman standing outside the terminal with one bag and a mission and her mother's voice in her ear. She stood there for exactly 1 moment. She said quietly, to the Korean air and to no one, and to her mother who was thousands of miles away behind institutional glass, that she was coming and to hold on a little longer. Then she picked up her bag and walked into the city. The TY Holdings penthouse was a different atmosphere entirely. Cold, precise, the specific silence of extreme wealth. Not peaceful, but controlled. Every surface chosen to project something. Every object earning its place through the story it told about the people who owned it. Mrs. Kim, the head housekeeper, delivered orientation with military efficiency. She outlined the schedule, the rules, the dietary restrictions, the boundaries of movement and speech and existence within the penthouse. Imani nodded and filed everything and began building the internal map that would guide the next 4 months. The first morning, 5:51 a.m. She expected the kitchen to herself. Kang Tae-yang was already there. He stood at the espresso machine with the expression of a man solving an equation he had not anticipated at this hour. There was no performance, no CEO. Just a person who had not slept enough standing in front of a machine that was not cooperating. And something about the specificity of that image, the most powerful man in her case files, puzzling over a portafilter, struck her in a way she had not prepared for. She crossed the kitchen. She locked the portafilter. The machine pulled correctly. He blinked and looked at her and asked if she had used this model before. She told him her mother had one. It was the truest sentence she would speak in that house for a long time. He told her his name. not his title, not his formal address. Just his name. The way someone tells you their name when they mean for you to use it. SEO Hye Rin arrived 9 minutes later. She looked at Imani the way people look at furniture they are deciding whether to keep. She gave instructions about presence and invisibility and the appropriate behavior of staff in a household like this one. Then she left, and Imani stood in the kitchen alone, and the real work began. What Imani observed in the first 2 weeks had a simple structure beneath its complexity. 2 people living in the same penthouse the way strangers occupy adjacent apartments. Separate bedrooms. Separate schedules. Separate lives running on parallel tracks that never touched. She photographed what she could. Carefully, methodically, building the case from the edges inward. But Tae-yang kept appearing where she did not expect him. Why the kitchen before dawn? Before the armor went fully on. The library after midnight, after the armor had worn through. The balcony in bad weather, standing in it like weather was something that happened to other people. A man retreating through his own home. She wrote that in her private notes, then spent 3 minutes deciding whether it was relevant or personal, and ultimately wrote it back and left it. The library came in week 3, late. Her official reason was reorganizing the reference section. Her real reason was the panel behind the third shelf of financial texts that had a compromised seal and needed 8 more minutes. Tae-yang appeared in the doorway, and she straightened and made her expression neutral and kept her hand away from the shelf. He noticed the book in her hand, Korean poetry, taken as cover, the 6 pages of which she had read without realizing. He asked if she read it. She told him her mother had introduced her to it, that Dorothy believed it was the most honest language she had ever encountered. Something moved in his face at that. He came into the library and talked with her, standing near the shelves, not sitting, moving like a man who had forgotten how to be still in a room without a function. About visibility, about what it meant to build something enormous and become invisible inside it, about the particular loneliness of being seen as a position rather than a person. His phone rang before either of them had finished saying everything that needed saying. He left. The panel behind the third shelf waited. Imani sat down on the library floor, which was not professional, and which was also completely necessary. Week 4, the morning ritual shifted. Tae-yang began taking breakfast in the kitchen instead of the study. He mentioned acoustics. He brought a book he never opened. Day by day, the small progressions accumulated. He remembered how she took her coffee without being reminded. She adjusted the temperature on his breakfast without being asked. They had entire conversations that were ostensibly about spice cabinets and HVAC systems, and the behavior of espresso machines that were not, in any meaningful way, about any of those things. On the 14th morning, he set a second cup near her without comment, and opened the book, and read 3 sentences, and set it down. And they sat in the early kitchen quiet together, and Imani thought this was the most dangerous thing that had happened in this house. And it involved nothing but coffee and silence, and a man who made a point of not making a point. Hye Rin noticed. Predators always notice. She called Imani into her sitting room on a Tuesday. The room designed to make visitors feel they were already on their way out, low seating and high lighting and furniture arranged for maximum psychological disadvantage. She offered pleasantries first. Then she talked about her husband, his isolation, his tendency to mistake genuine attention for genuine connection. She talked about the woman who had come before Imani. What had happened to her? How quietly and completely it had been handled. She framed it as advice. Imani held eye contact 1 beat longer than a maid should. Then she dropped it and said she was there to do her job and nothing else. She walked out of that room and filed the threat in its appropriate folder. Not fear, because she had been in rooms with people who had actual weapons, but relevance. Hirin was afraid of something she had seen in Imani. Afraid people do not issue warnings, they simply act. Which meant Hirin had noticed something worth warning about. That was useful. A Wednesday evening. Unseasonal rain arriving without announcement, drumming the floor-to-ceiling glass with the commitment that Seoul rain specializes in. Imani stepped onto the balcony to retrieve cushions and found Tae-yang already there. Standing at the railing, jacket on, completely soaked, as if he had walked out an hour before and the rain had simply happened around him. She set down the cushions. She stood at the railing beside him, 18 inches between them, and both of them facing the city. She asked what the rain helped with. She could see in his shoulders that it helped something. He touched his temple briefly and said the noise inside went quiet when everything outside was loud enough. She thought about her mother, about the Sunday calls, and Dorothy's voice kept steady through institutional glass. She told him she had a different method for the same problem, reading the same page of the same book until the noise decided it was not worth competing. He asked if it worked. She said, well enough. He turned to look at her with the rain on his face and the CEO entirely absent, and something younger there. Something that had not been exercised in a long time. His hand moved along the railing, slid toward hers, stopped, 1 inch of space between them. The rain filled everything. The city blurred below. Neither of them moved. His phone rang, and the wall rebuilt itself around him with a professionalism that was almost painful to witness. He apologized. She told him not to. He went inside. Imani kept her hand exactly where it was on the railing and stared at the 1 inch of space and stood in the rain until she could breathe normally. Week 8. Tae-yang in Singapore. Hirin at a charity retreat. The penthouse belonging entirely to Imani in the case. She worked room by room, methodical and unhurried, the way the Secret Service had taught her that patience is a technique rather than a virtue. The East Wing's study was what she had been building toward for 2 months. The third panel on the left side held a secondary hardwired system running its own power, separate from the penthouse network. She was inside it in 12 minutes, clean, no trace. That night, in her Mapo studio, Dorothy's case files on the left side of the table and the downloaded data on the right, Imani read for 4 hours without stopping. The transfers attributed to her mother, traced back through 3 layers of shell documentation, did not originate from Dorothy Cole. They originated from an entity called Meridian Consulting. Meridian Consulting belonged to O.J. Min, Tae-yang's COO, his childhood best friend. The man who had looked at the table, directed by CO Hirin, approved through Chairman Park's office. Dorothy Cole had found a Meridian Consulting invoice during a routine audit. Had asked one question about it. 1. And someone had decided that was one question too many. And had used the full machinery of a $40 billion corporation to silence one woman who had done nothing except her job with integrity. Beyond her mother's case, the files contained a complete hostile takeover architecture. Twy Holdings' core intellectual property being quietly transferred to a competitor entity through Meridian. Board members systematically approached and turned over 18 months. Regulatory filings pre-staged under false authorization. Frame-up documents already prepared. Tae-yang's signature forged, waiting to be deployed if he resisted or discovered the plan. Tae-yang's name appeared nowhere as a participant. He was not the architect. He was the other target. Imani sat back from the table and stared at the ceiling for a long time. Her mother was in prison for asking one question about one invoice. The man she had come to expose was being set up to follow her there. She called the prison. Collect. Illinois. Her mother's voice came through warm and steady despite everything. Imani told her she had found it. All of it. Dorothy exhaled, and in that exhale, Imani heard 14 months of held breath releasing. She told her mother everything. Everything except the part that was becoming complicated in ways she had not yet told anyone. She spent 3 weeks confirming what the files contained, because she was too good to act on almost certain. She tailed Oh Jae-min, a private members club in Gangnam. Thursday nights, he met Hyerin at a corner table, voices low, and Imani worked from the floor above with everything she needed to catch what the audio missed. The takeover was not 3 weeks away. It was timed to the annual summit. The board ratification, the IP transfer, the competitor handoff. All staged for one night, designed to look like a legitimate restructuring. If Tae-yang resisted, the forged documents surfaced and he burned alongside the plan. If he cooperated, they might allow him to keep his name. Jae-min said that Tae-yang had trusted him. Hyerin said she knew. That was why he was there. Imani drove back through Seoul with everything she had come for. She could send it to Agent Reyes that night. Dorothy would be free. Tae-yang would burn. Mission complete. She parked outside the tower and sat there for 47 minutes. Then she took the elevator upstairs and walked to the study and knocked on the door. He looked up from his desk when she entered. He registered the hour. Then he registered her face, saw and something in him sharpened in a way that had nothing to do with business. She put the drive on his desk. She told him she needed to show him something about his company, about his wife, and about his best friend. She watched each of those 3 names land separately. Then she told him the other thing, that her name was not Imani Carter. She told him everything, in order, without softening a single piece. Dorothy Cole, Chicago. 12 years of perfect service. 1 question about 1 invoice. The manufactured transfer trail. Meridian Consulting. Jaemin's entity. Hyren's authorization. Chairman Park's approval. Her own Secret Service background. The cover. 4 months of access and documentation and careful, precise infiltration. And the hostile takeover. The forged documents with his name on them. Waiting like a loaded weapon in a server Hyerin controlled. She put everything on his desk and finished and waited. The silence that followed was the kind that means a world is rearranging itself from the foundation outward. He stood, moved to the window. The same posture she had seen on the balcony, a man processing something enormous by looking at something bigger than the problem. He said she had everything she needed weeks ago. He asked why she was standing in his study at 11 in the evening instead of on a plane to Washington. She looked at him. The coffee cup, the rain, the library, the book he never opened, the 18 months, 47 minutes in a parking lot, the knot she had almost not made. She told him that letting them frame him was not justice. It was just redirecting the same crime toward a different target. He turned and asked if that was the only reason. The question landed in the room and she did not answer it, and they both understood what the silence meant. He asked what she needed. His voice had already decided. She could hear the decision in it before he finished the sentence. She told him she needed his cooperation, his board relationships, and 3 weeks. He told her she had them. He said her real name, Imani Cole, once, like placing something in a permanent location. He thanked her for knocking. They worked from opposite ends of the conference table for 3 weeks, the awareness between them carefully managed, both of them treating it the way you treat unexploded material. Present, acknowledged through the deliberate act of not touching it, handled with corresponding care. Imani built the evidence architecture, or Agent Reyes was briefed. The FBI Seoul attaché was positioned. Jaemin was approached separately, offered cooperation terms, his statement taken before he knew Hye-rin had been contacted. The corroboration independent, airtight, the testimony of two witnesses who did not know they were corroborating each other. Tae-yang identified the three board members who had not been turned, mapped the legal counterstructures, built the framework that would hold under the scrutiny that was coming. One evening, he looked up from the documents and told her that when this was finished, whatever her mother needed, he would make it right personally. She told him he did not owe her that. He told her his company had put Dorothy Cole in federal prison, and he would spend the rest of his professional life undoing that, and this was not negotiable. She looked at him across all the evidence that connected them, and above all the reasons this had already become complicated. She said they should get through the summit first. He asked about after. She told him after was something they would figure out together when they got there. The TY Holdings annual summit, grand ballroom, 380 guests, every significant player in Korean corporate society wearing their most expensive performances. Imani moved through it for the last time in her uniform, carrying her silver tray, invisible in the way she had practiced for 4 months. She identified the competitor's representative at 9:07 in the evening. A face memorized from the downloaded files, a man with no legitimate reason to be in this building. Hye-rin's invitation. The handoff happening tonight, rather than in 3 weeks as the documents had indicated. She found Tae-yang in 60 seconds and told him the timeline had moved. The vote, the transfer, the competitor handoff, all tonight. She confirmed that Agent Reyes was in position, that the 3 board members were holding. He said they were ready. He looked at her and said that whatever happened after that night, she should know that what was between them was the most honest thing that had happened to him in 15 years. She told him not to get sentimental yet, that they still had work to do. He told her to stay close. She said she would be right there. She meant it on every level simultaneously. Hye-rin moved through the ballroom at 9:34 with 2 champagne glasses, heading for Tae-yang. And Imani watched her hand with the trained attention of someone who knows what to look for when no one else in the room does. The pause. The small vial. The redirect. A sedative, fast acting, enough to make him cooperative and confused during the board ratification. Manageable, scriptable. Imani moved without running, without creating a scene, using placement rather than speed. The collision was elegant. A tray catching an elbow, both glasses, champagne across white linen, an apology delivered with perfect deference, while her body positioned itself between Hye-rin and Tae-yang, with the natural movement of someone cleaning up an accident. Hye-rin smiled at the surrounding faces, and then leaned close and said Imani had no idea what she was doing. Imani said she knew exactly what she was doing, and so did Hye-rin, and it was the last thing Hye-rin would do that night. Hye-rin pulled back, something recalculated behind her eyes. The furniture had just spoken. Tae-yang called the emergency board session at 9:52. The summit's private conference suite right now tonight. The turned board members scrambled. Jaemin moved to redirect. Chairman Park started to position himself. Tae-yang said Jaemin's name quietly, stripped of every performance, the voice of a man who had nothing left to perform, and told him to sit down. Jaemin sat. The evidence went on the table. Dorothy Cole's framing, Meridian Consulting, Jaemin's entity, Hye-rin's authorization, Chairman Park's approval trail, the hostile takeover architecture, the forged documents, the competitor representative sitting in this building on Hye-rin's invitation. The room went into the kind of silence that means a story that has been running for 18 months is reaching its end. 3 turned board members looked at the documentation, looked at the room, looked at the agents moving quietly into position at the exits, and stepped back toward Tae-yang without a word. After the session, in the corridor, Tae-yang and Jae-min stood alone together for the last time, as whatever they had been. Jae-min said he had thought he was protecting Tae-yang. He said Hye-rin had told him Tae-yang was losing perspective, that the company would collapse without intervention. Tae-yang told him quietly that Dorothy Cole, Imani's mother, had been in federal prison for 14 months because Jae-min had signed invoices for an entity that did not exist, because Hye-rin had told him to, and because he had trusted that the damage would be manageable and had not asked what the damage was. Jae-min said he had not known about Dorothy. Tae-yang said that was the worst part, that he had not known, that he had simply done what he was told and trusted that the collateral was acceptable. He told Jae-min to go with the agents, and Jae-min went. Imani found Tae-yang in the empty corridor afterward, standing the way people stand when something enormous has just finished and the body has not caught up to the ending yet. She stood beside him and did not speak. After a long moment, he said 15 years, and she said she knew, and that was everything that needed to be said about it. Hye-rin found Imani near the service exit, alone, deliberately. She offered a compliment about Imani's patience and professionalism. Then the pleasantness dropped finally, the mask coming off the way it does when someone has run out of things to protect. She made promises about attorneys and resources and what would happen to Dorothy Cole regardless of what had been assembled that evening. Imani told her that Jae-min had given a full statement at 7 in the evening, before the summit started, in exchange for cooperation. She told her that Chairman Park's office had cooperated separately that afternoon, before either of them knew the other had talked, and that the statements corroborated independently. She reached into her jacket and produced the federal warrant for Hye-rin's arrest, signed an hour before the summit began. She told Hye-rin to call her attorney. She said the agents in the lobby were waiting for the signal. She said Hye-rin had built a very thorough plan, and that she was a very thorough person, and that thoroughness, in the end, had decided things. Then she walked away, and Hye-rin, for the first time in this story, had nothing left to say. The ballroom emptied into controlled chaos. Agencies, statements, cameras at every entrance. The ending of something that had been running for 18 months, and the beginning of whatever came after. Tae-yang found Imani at the far end of the corridor, and they stood together in the aftermath settling around them. When she started to run through the immediate legal priorities, he said her name quietly, and she stopped. He told her he knew what needed to happen, that her mother would be home, that his legal team would move immediately. He asked about right now. This corridor. The two of them. She said the words she needed to say. That she had come here with a false name and a mission, and 4 months of carefully maintained deception. He said he knew. She said she had come here to use access to his home to build a case against his company. He said he knew that too. He asked why she had knocked on the study door instead of simply walking out with everything she needed. She thought about the coffee cup, the rain, the library floor, the 47 minutes in the parking lot before she made the decision. She told him that letting them destroy him was not the truth, that the truth mattered more than the mission. He looked at her and said he had been choosing to be in the kitchen at 5:50 in the morning for 8 weeks, and he thought she already knew why. She told him she did not know what this looked like going forward. He said neither did he. He said he would rather not know with her than know exactly without her. The fallout was rapid and comprehensive. SEO Hye-rin arrested the night of the summit. Corporate espionage, fraud, obstruction, her family's legal representation scrambling and failing. Jae-min's cooperation became the spine of the prosecution. Chairman Park removed from the board within 48 hours, criminal referral filed through the appropriate channels. The competitor entity dissolved, IP transfers reversed, regulatory action initiated simultaneously in 3 jurisdictions. TY Holding shaken but standing. Tae-yang addressed the full staff the following morning without a script, without a performance, with nothing but the truth about what had happened inside their building. The appellate filing for Dorothy Cole, 3 days after the summit. On the 4th morning, Imani's phone rang. Collect, Illinois. Her mother's voice came through warm and steady, and Imani's voice broke just slightly when she answered. And she let it, because there was no one to be steady for anymore, because her mother was almost home. Dorothy told her they had called that morning with news of the appellate filing. She asked if Imani was safe. She asked if Imani was okay. Imani looked out the window of her Mappo studio at Seoul in early light and said she thought she was going to be. She thought yes. Dorothy said her name. Imani said, "Yeah, Mom." Dorothy told her to tell her about him. Imani laughed. Real, unguarded, sounding like herself. The version of herself that had existed before all of this and was apparently still there underneath it. She told her mother she had been in prison, not unconscious. Dorothy said she had been in prison, not blind, and told Imani to go ahead. And Imani did. That evening, alone in the Mappo studio with the adrenaline finally metabolized and the case files around her representing a completed mission rather than an active wound, Imani sat on the floor with her back against the bed. She thought about who she had been at Incheon Airport 4 months before. The anger that had held her upright, the wall, the mission as the only identity she had permitted herself. Her mother was coming home. The thing she had come for was done. Victory, without the person you did it for standing next to you, has a specific loneliness. It does not make the victory less. It just makes it different from what you imagined. And you have to sit with that difference on the floor of a small rented room in Mappo until it becomes something you can carry. A knock at the door. Tae-yang was there with 2 paper bags and a slightly uncertain expression that she had not seen on him in month 1. He told her he had researched American comfort food available in Seoul. He said the results were mixed, but he had committed. She looked at this man, in the doorway of her small rented room, holding takeout with a slightly uncertain expression, all that power wearing something ordinary and unhurried, and stepped back to let him in. They ate on the floor with Dorothy's case files between them, and Imani talked about the before. Not the mission, the before. Dorothy reading Korean novels on Sunday mornings. The way she used to say the truth has a sound. Learn to listen for it, like it was the most practical advice in the world. 14 months of calls through glass. The discipline of keeping her voice steady so that her mother would not hear her afraid. Tae-yang listened the way very few people know how. Completely, without preparing his response, without waiting for his turn, without making it about himself. He said Dorothy sounded extraordinary. Imani said she was. She said he would see. The implication of those 2 words settled between them. Neither of them spoke around it. Both of them felt it arrive and stay. Headlines appeared within 48 hours on every business platform and international news feed. I'm carrying her real name and her real face and the real story of what she had done. The invisibility she had built and maintained for 4 months. Completely gone. Tae-yang asked if that was a problem. Imani considered it genuinely, the way she considered things that actually mattered, She said no. She said she had been invisible for 4 months, and she believed she was done with that. Tae-yang's father arrived unannounced. The way men who built things from nothing move through spaces they have decided belong to them. He was in his 70s, iron-haired, carrying the weight of the original company that he had handed to his son and watched from a careful distance ever since. He looked at Imani once, the comprehensive assessment of a man who had been reading rooms since before she was born. And then he looked at his son. He said Tae-yang had created a significant public situation. Tae-yang said he had recovered a company that was being systematically dismantled by trusting someone who had told him the truth when she could have used it against him, which was, he noted, exactly what his father had always told him was the only kind of person worth trusting. The elder Kang looked at his son for a long moment. Then he looked at Imani, directly, for the first time, with the full weight of his attention. He said her mother had asked a question about an invoice. Imani said one question, that was all. He was quiet. He said that should not have happened. She said no, it should not have. He nodded, once, to her, directly, and then told his son not to waste this. Then he left. The room breathed. Imani said she was not certain what that had been. Tae-yang told her it was the most his father had ever conceded to anyone in a first meeting. He said it was the closest the elder Kang came to welcome. She was packing, the same one bag, her Mappo studio, mission complete, when Tae-yang appeared in the doorway and asked where she was going. She told him home. Chicago? Her mother needed her there when she walked out. He said he would be there. She looked at him, this man who was offering to fly to Illinois, and asked if he meant that. He said he would go anywhere with a reason worth going for. She told him one condition. He said to name it. She told him he would meet her mother before he said anything like that again, that Dorothy made the final call on everyone, and that this was not negotiable. He said he had researched Chicago. He said he was prepared. She laughed. Real, caught it. Let it go, let it stay, and told him to come on then. Federal Correctional, Illinois, 9 in the morning. The gate opened. Dorothy Cole walked out, and she was smaller than Imani remembered, and then she was not. Because the moment she saw her daughter, she was exactly the size she had always been, which was large enough to hold everything important. They stood in the parking lot for a long time, just standing. Imani told her they had done it. Dorothy told her daughter she had held. Dorothy pulled back and looked at her. The full read, the read that only mothers do. And then her eyes moved to the man standing 2 careful steps behind them, giving them the space they needed. She asked if that was him. She said she had been in prison, not blind. Imani confirmed it. Dorothy looked at Tae-yang with the kind of comprehensive assessment that had apparently run in the family for at least 2 generations. She asked if he had brought food. He said deep dish. He said he had researched extensively. Dorothy nodded once, slowly, and said they would see. She took her daughter's arm as they walked to the car and leaned close and said quietly that he had come. Imani said yes. Dorothy said Korean billionaire CEOs did not fly to Illinois for nothing. Imani started to say Mom, and Dorothy said she was noting facts, that this was what she did, and that Imani should let her have this. 3 weeks later, Incheon Airport. The ticket had Imani Cole printed on it. Her real name, no cover, no alias, no one she was pretending to be. She stood outside the terminal in the same spot she had occupied 4 months before, with one bag and a mission, and her mother's voice telling her to hold on. And the city was the same city, and the air was the same cold Seoul air, and she was the same person who had stood here before. and also not. More of herself now than she had been then. Tae-yang was at the curb, without a driver. She told him she had seen the car. He said of course she had. They walked through the terminal together, and she had no tray, no uniform, no cover. Just Imani Cole walking through Seoul with her real name and her real reason, visible in every sense that mattered. TY Holdings Tower, 38th floor, the rebuilt board. He introduced her by her real name and her real background and her role going forward as independent compliance advisor. The room looked at her the way rooms look at something they have not yet decided how to categorize. An elder board member noted that she had run an undercover operation inside the building. She told him she had, and that she had found the people who were stealing it, and the woman they had framed to cover it, and that the company was intact, and the IP portfolio had been recovered, and the evidence was airtight, and she would call that a favorable outcome. The elder board member considered this. He said he would call it that too, and that was the end of that particular conversation. Tae-yang caught her eye across the table, the almost smile. She had learned by then that it was his version of a full one. Evening, the penthouse balcony, the railing where their hands had not touched once, months ago, in the rain. With 1 inch of charged space between them and a city below that did not care about either of them. Imani told him her mother wanted to visit. He said she could have the full tour, and he would learn to make her tea correctly. She warned him Dorothy was very specific about her tea. He said he was a fast learner. She told him this was complicated. He said everything worth having was. She said his world had rules about people like her. He said his world was going to adapt. She said that was a very confident statement. He said he had built a $40 billion company. That confidence was not the issue. She reminded him that his wife had almost taken it. He said his former wife, and almost, and would have, if a black American woman from Chicago had not fixed his espresso machine and then systematically dismantled the entire conspiracy from the inside. She looked at him. He told her she had saved everything he built and then knocked on his door instead of walking away with the evidence, and that this was not something he took lightly. He said it was not something he would ever take lightly. Not ever. The city below them carried on. Enormous, indifferent, dangerous, alive. Dorothy Cole was home. Tae-yang still had his company. The people who had used them both were facing the truth about what they had done. The world ahead was complicated and not safe and full of people who would have opinions about two people standing at this railing. She said partners. He said partners. His hand found hers on the railing. No hovering, no almost, no inch of charged space, just the decision already made, arriving finally as contact, warm and certain and completely without hesitation. She said equals. He said always. He said that had never been in question. The skyline did not change. The world did not soften. But Imani Cole was standing at this railing with her real name and her real face, and her hand in the hand of a man who had flown to Illinois with a paper bag and no driver, and her mother was home, and the truth had won, and that was, as Dorothy would say, a fact worth noting. She said that was enough. He said more than. The city agreed, in its way. Dear friends, if you made it to the very end of this story, you already know it was never really about one night. It was about what it costs to choose truth over safety. About a mother who held on and a daughter who refused to let her go. About two people who found each other in the middle of something that should have kept them apart forever. Now please, I want you to answer these questions in the comments. What was the exact moment you knew Imani was not just a maid? And would you have knocked on that door? Please kindly tell us where exactly you're watching from. Subscribe to Noir Desires channel so you never miss what comes next. Because the next story is already coming. And share this story to family and friends. Thanks for watching.